Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for another few minutes of fun. I've got some fish tins on the table today. They're a really lovely thing to use as a substrate, bit of recycling. And yeah, you can put in little vignette scenes. There's a little autumnal one, two of the Tim Holtz paper dolls, some little mushrooms in there, and leafy die cuts with a touch of shimmer. And that one, yeah, I did a little bit of washi taping around the edge, a couple of word stickers, that sort of thing going on in there, along with wildflower stems from my garden. There's one. This one this was actually following the ingredients for a challenge. I can't remember now what was in the challenge, but I think it was something along the lines of a bear and raindrops, and I don't know what else. There's one of my PaperArtsy cornflower stamps there, little metal label, again, dry flower stems, and some of the fabulous little baubles, and I also did some glossy droplets to create raindrops in the background. Yeah, and oh look, and some washi tape again around the edge, just nice natural ones. So yeah, it's just a lovely place to play. As you can see, I quite like those little gorgeous Tim Holtz Idea-ology mushrooms in there. If you don't want to do that, it's perfectly easy to make your own out of air-dried clay. They're such a lovely form to play with because they come in every single shape and size that you can possibly imagine, the number of different fungi in the world. So yeah, I used a couple of my own handmade ones on the top of this artist trading box, along with words from some of my PaperArtsy quote sets and the fabulous little Tim Holtz mushroom stamps there. So the working in dimension is fun every now and then. So I've grabbed a couple of things that I think I might want to play with. I'm thinking of putting a background into here. I've already gessoed this one, just using a natural sponge, dip in the gesso it onto the tin. This one, they come in all shapes and sizes, these fish tins, little, big, long, skinny, as you can see. And as per usual, I hoard and keep them. I don't know whether we'll use any or all of this. These poppy seed heads have still got poppy seeds in, look, just gathering in the bottom of there. So I might continue to keep those in that spare tin until I'm ready to maybe include them in our little scene. So yeah, this one would have been much easier actually to paint because this is just a pale gold colour, which would be very simple. In fact, it's so nice that when I come to do that one, I might not paint it at all because I like that. This was dark green with John West sardines written all over it or something. So I have just given that a couple of coats of gesso. In fact, I might, while I'm fiddling around and deciding on other things that I might play with, I could just give it another little dab in places where it's, although you're not going to see much of the back, and also you're not going to see much of the interior back, because as I say, I'm thinking of putting this little background in. That's one of my ink splotchy backgrounds. At some point this year, I hope to be creating an actual class with tips and tricks for my personal take on that. It's Tim Holtz's wrinkle-free distress technique for getting those delicious ink droplets. You can see him, you can absolutely find him demoing it on YouTube, or all his amazing lives on his website, timholtz.com. But obviously I have various colour combinations that I like, little tips and tricks and how I do it, and people have asked and asked and asked, and I think that one sort of deserves a proper class full. So if you're interested in those, make sure you're signed up to my mailing list via alisonbomber.com. That's me, Alison Bomber, in case you didn't know. And yeah, I'm hoping 2025 will finally be the year where I get it together to have that class properly in place for those who've been curious for years about precisely how I create my ink splotch backgrounds. So that's another little extra coat of that. I don't mind that it's rough. I like, as you know, the textural look of that. I don't want a completely smooth finish. I have in the past also put Crackle paste around the edges of these because that's quite fun. A natural sponge is a really nice thing to use because, as you can see, it's got much more interesting sort of cracks and crenellations than you'd get on a standard sponge. But obviously you have to make your peace with the fact that that has come from the ocean and was a living thing. Good, I'm going to rinse that out so that it doesn't dry hard on my sponge, and then, yeah, be back to see what it is I want to put in here and how I might alter it in order to create a little scene inside my fish tin. Back in a sec. Okay, so I don't know which, if any of these in the long run is going to make it in, but there's a couple of things I thought would be quite nice. I love these little salvage dolls, Tim Holtz. I've also found some originals occasionally. The real thing, frozen Charlottes, they're officially called, the little broken dolls that you find from the 19th century and early 20th century. I realise I should have kept the sponge with the paint on, because although I love them, they're a little bit shiny in their original form, so I usually alter those a little bit, and we'll do that. I thought this little wooden fence might be a nice thing to have around, but that I also want to alter slightly. I'm thinking of putting some Crackle paste onto that, although it would have to be a very fine layer of Crackle paste. Have I still got some Crackle paint somewhere? Hang on, I'm gonna go and have a look. Answer: yes, I do have some Crackle paint. This is the DecoArt Media Crackle paint. They also create a paste and a glaze, but it's so long since I've had it open that it's actually turned into what looks like more of a Crackle paste. The paint used to be a more fluid application. It's possible if I add some water I can kind of turn that back into a paint, but since I've got it out now, I'm just going to apply a very light layer of that onto this little fence so that I can put it to one side and let it do its crackling. I should really have done it last night so that it's ready for me to play with. Shall I do it on both sides? Yes, because I don't quite know for sure yet whether I'm going to want that post sticking out in that direction or the other direction. So if I lean it against something, I should be able to dry both sides at once. So I am going to put some on this side as well, because I'm putting on quite a thin layer, she said, rapidly scraping some off. It should dry quite quickly, given it has changed formulation since it was made. It used to be runnier. It's possible this won't crack at all, which is why I'm sort of bouncing up and down to give it some texture regardless. So whether it cracks or doesn't crack, I'm going to have a little textured fence. I'm sorry, I don't know where this came from anymore. It's one of many little wooden embellishment things I've got stored away in my stash. Don't ask me. I don't know where this little fence came from any longer. Maybe one of the amazing Polish companies that produce beautiful, delicate little die cut wooden shapes. So yeah, I'm gonna guess it's maybe Polish. If anybody recognises it, of course, please do let me know, and I'll be happy to put a credit in the description along with all the other things that I use in this video. And try always to remember to list. I'm not terribly bothered about getting the complete edges entirely white, because it's going to give me a nice distressed look. I might even go so far as to ink those later, so no point putting white paint on them. Right, I need to lean that upright so that both sides can dry and hopefully crackle at once. Yeah, you can see it's kind of dry around the edges. There's bits of paint crackle, bits of dried flakes of paint coming off that as I open it. It just happens to be a while since I've had that one out. I used to use it all the time. It's a great crackle. I may experiment with putting some water into it and see how that goes. If anybody's ever had their Crackle paint dry out and have added water, does it still crackle? Let me know. Good. This, I think, is still a bit wet. I'm just going to give it a quick blast with the heat gun so that I can start playing and arranging things. And then, yes, I'm going to get on to just changing how shiny this little girl is here. So give it a quick blast. That's heating up the metal, of course, so watch yourself when you're heating metal. it will heat up very effectively. And then while it's still hot, it's still drying that paint. So you get drying effects even while it's not directly being heated. So yeah, I generally just give a little coat, first of all, of gesso to these resin pieces or plastic pieces. Just again, because it's going to give me some tooth on the surface to take other mediums. You can go direct in with something like alcohol ink, which will take on plastic, but other paints and inks might be a little less keen to do their thing on a shiny plastic surface. So yeah, alcohol ink will be fine. But I also like, just again, that little bit of extra texture we're getting from the gesso, and a sort of more antique-y white than the slightly ivory creamy colour of the original plastic. So again, I've got white paint on my sponge again, so I'm gonna have to go and wash my sponge again while she's just drying a little bit. Grand. So sort of the thing that is running through my head, just to give you an advance thought about what's happening here, is almost a sort of Alice in Wonderland feeling of giant poppy seed heads, a tiny little human in the face of, I don't know, a world that's a bit topsy-turvy, things are big that shouldn't be big. And I'm wondering whether one of these little houses is somewhere in the background. So if she's in the foreground, you'd get quite a good sense of perspective if you've got that house there. Maybe the giant mushroom along with the poppy seeds. I'm also wondering about a giant moth, just to add to that. If I use the moth, probably I can't use a house because that's going to be a bit tricky to get that. Or it might not be her at all. She might not get to take part. It might be something like this little Tim Holtz silhouette bird. So you quite like him perched in the corner. And then, yeah, I was sort of thinking, pick this up carefully because it's still wet. I was thinking maybe the fence down here, or maybe the fence goes a little further back in here. That'll want propping up with a sponge or a little bit of wood. Yeah, it's all to play for, really. But I'm fairly certain I want this background in, so I'm going to start with that. It's not quite wide enough, but I think by the time it's sitting down back in the tin, that's not going to be too much of a problem. So I think the simplest thing is to pop that on top of there and just draw a line across the top to tell me where I need to cut it. The inner wall is, of course, just a little bit smaller than the outer wall, because you've got the width of the metal itself. But I'll start with it too big. You can always trim it smaller. What you can't do is trim it larger. So I've just got a slight curve on that where it went round the tin. Is that going to be enough to fit in? Oh, actually, it's not going to be too wide at all. That's brilliant. So let's just get the proper curves of this tin in now that I know it's going to work. So again, just drawing around it. It's like, remember elementary school? You draw around the shape, you draw around your hand. Remember doing that? So that was a really weird sense memory that just happened then. Good. So I'm just going to cut on that, right on that line, because as I say, it will be a little bit smaller than where I'm drawing around, because I'm drawing around the outside and I need it to go on the inside. Did I really do the top? That bottom looks better than the top. Let's get that little corner out and that little corner out. Okay, so I can just see those lines to just really trim my background. And yeah, I deliberately chose not the big deep blue top part, but this sort of rusty, wintry bottom edge that almost doesn't need gluing. It's so firmly in. However, I do want to glue it. I don't want a long-term problem. I'm going to use just a little pointy implement to hopefully fish it out again. Oops, so well cut. Oh, there it goes. There it is. It's a little bit tight around this bottom corner, so I'm just going to take a little trim because it's sticking up just a little bit, not quite making contact with the back. And yeah, I think I'm just going to go, yes, I want it. The tin dips down at the edges, so it's not actually going to glue down in the edges, it's going to glue in that center position. Just make sure there's no difference between top and bottom. And back in it goes, this time with some glue underneath. Pressing down firmly. But as I say, I don't think that's going anywhere, whatever happens, to be honest. So let's have a look at these poppy stems. I'm really quite keen on those. It's one consistent thing in both of those that I showed you are wildflower stems. There's something about that gives me great joy, having those natural elements in the mix. I'm going to take a little look at this mushroom and see if I want it as well. It's quite nice. It's very big, the mushroom. In this one I've used the 2 smaller mushrooms from the pack. We'll see. Let's have her. Yeah, see, she's great next to the poppy seeds, poppy stems. These again are just from my garden. We have beautiful poppies, and now they're beautiful crafting embellishments. I'm still thinking about that. I'm also still thinking about, these are left over from the little Crackle ATCs we did, might be 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago. I'm thinking about that in the background. If she's in the foreground, is that then confused by having poppy stems in front of it? Maybe it would have to go in the middle. In the middle it doesn't look good. That gives us the angle gives us a much better sense of depth. What about if it's the other way around and you go over there? Again, it might not be the little house at all. This is the playing stage. This is, what story is it telling me? Is this little girl in her Alice in Wonderland? Or do we want the house in the background, maybe a couple of poppy stems one side, maybe 1 poppy stem down here, and maybe, where did that bird end up? Something like that. So I quite like him because he's got an echo. He was done a different day with a different set of inks on a different colour background, actually, because this is definitely white, those are definitely manila. Quite enjoying that. Let's get the fence back into the mix so that we can see what that does. That would have to then go a little further back, so then it would be poppies in the foreground, fence partway back, little house. That's quite nice. And the bird. Oh, decisions. While I'm debating that, I'm just going to leave that to one side so that I can see it and kind of decide what I like about it. Let's do another layer on her. So I like to dirty her up a little bit, give her a bit more of a vintage look, and there are any number of mediums you can use for that. I quite often use the PaperArtsy Fresco paint in French Roast, which is a dark, cool brown. Tim Holtz or Paula Cheney of Lucky Day will always tell you that mushroom alcohol ink is the alcohol ink for vintage looks, and if you get some on, it's going to react with that gesso, but then if you can get to it quickly enough, if you don't like the look, you can use rubbing alcohol to get it off again, or you can just go back over with some more gesso, which will pick up a bit of the colour underneath. So I'm just knocking that back, but you can see it gets into the cracks and the crevices. It's really nice doing these little dolls with Crackle paste as well. Crackle paste, Crackle paint, just a really thin layer. And then you get that mushroom ink going right down into all those cracks and crevices. But some days I've done that. Let me see if I've got a crackled one nearby that I can show you. Maybe she's up there. 2 ticks? Yeah, I think she maybe had a little bit of Crackle paste on her, but she's inside that little antiques emporium and a little bit invisible in today's lighting. But yeah, she definitely had some Crackle glaze or Crackle paste, and the ink and the paint have gone into those little cracks. So you can have like a cracked china doll if that's what you're after. But you can see that alcohol ink gives us a really good go at, oh, she's broken and she's dirty and she's been lying neglected and forlorn. Yeah, I don't know that it needs anything else. I could go in with a little bit of the Fresco paint as well, and that would give us some darker shadows in places. Yeah, let's do it. Let's have layers of dirt. Mixed media it is. So let's mix our mediums. Here it is. So this is the French roast. As you can see, it's all mucky because I use it a lot. It is one of PaperArtsy's semi-opaque paints, so it's already partly translucent, but then I generally give it a little bit of water additionally because I want to be able to wipe it away as well. And then again, it's just putting it on in various places, letting it get into the cracks. And then you can either let it dry like that, excuse me, oops, and I hit you as well. So I've let the camera still again a little bit after whacking it as I tried to clear my throat. So yeah, she's still there. There's still paint. And as you can see, that's a slightly darker, cooler brown than the mushroom alcohol ink. So it's giving us another layer of dirt, another decade of aging and weathering and getting dirty. A quick little blast with the heat gun will just dry her off. There is something about the neglect and the sort of forlorn melancholy of that, which, yeah, I don't know, does good things in my brain when I'm storytelling. The loneliness, the neglect. This is stuck down now, and I seem to have, oh, I see it's poppy seeds. I was just thinking, what are all those bits rolling around in there? Yeah, let's put them in this tin, and then in a few weeks I can plant them out into the garden. Right, I'm still quite keen on this little house. I'm going to trim these poppy stems now because it's starting to annoy me that I can't look at them in the box, in the tin. So yeah, a little bit more. So they're going to be something like that. See, that starts to make more sense when you can get them into the interior. But we'll have one that sort of comes into the foreground, and luckily, by chance, I've kept the largest one, the largest head, untrimmed so far. So that's going to come into the foreground. He could still play a part. I'm wondering if it's not the house. I'm wondering if the house is throwing me now. Let's put her in just to see where she might. Then it's not the bird. Then maybe it's back to the house. It's juggling, it's playing, it's seeing where something tells you a story that interests you. Because she's now brown, against that brown part of the background, she's now not showing up quite as well as she did. So let's try swapping sides so that she's now in front of these white splotches. That's going to put poppy seed heads somewhere over here. I think it might be the house that's throwing me, you know, because it's quite hard to get the perspective to be distant and foreground and middle distance. Although there is something quite nice about the little house. I'm going to need to give it something to stand on if it is going to be there. So that might be some bits of washi tape. Stay there. Just pretend for me, would you? Let's have a look at this little mushroom. Yeah, the mushroom is too large for me for today. We'll keep that for another day. What about this little fence? And there's maybe a poppy growing outside the fence. Some poppies behind the fence, some poppies inside the fence. That would be quite nice balance just on the rim there with one poppy in front. Yeah, that's starting to tell me a story. Starting to enjoy that. Are we okay with that house? Do we want to get rid of that house? See, the fence and the house live in the same world for me. You have a house, you have a fence. Let's put it in the middle again, see how that does. Just off centre. There we go. That's starting to shape up into something. And then what I might use is some of this natural moss, just to create a kind of base around the bottom here. Yeah, I'm starting to like what's happening. So one of the things when I'm gluing things down into a box like this is using little bits of cardboard to just bring things forward or move things back. Ooh, ooh, look, quite like that. That's a little dried hydrangea petal. That's definitely going to be in there. Grand. Okay, let's just move forward. Sometimes you just have to go, it's sort of it, and it'll start to make itself clear if I just let it happen rather than trying to decide everything in advance. I can feel the things that are making me happy. I can notice when things are not quite what I'm after. So this is a little bit of Tim Holtz design tape, and I'm just going to tear it lengthwise down the tape and create a little bit of land for this house to rest on. So sticking into there, sticking into there. I like to tear it so that I get less even edges, just so there's something a little bit random and decayed about even that element. Not terribly bothered about having the words the right way up. We'll go a little bit further so that we've got that sense of the distance. So I've just given that somewhere to sit. That already makes me happier. You see the difference that makes, giving it something to sit on so it's not just floating in midair. I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to glue it down. So yeah, these are were the darker versions of these little wooden houses, done with speckled egg distress glaze, and then on the dark versions that was over speckled egg paint, I think. I'll link the video down below so you can see where those little houses were made. And if she's in the foreground, she's probably going to come up a bit from the back. I think we'll mount her on something. And I'm just trying to make sure I'm leaving room for poppies to grow around that side of the house. Yeah, that works. Let's get some moss into the bottom because I think that's also going to make me happy. So yeah, you can get these natural mosses in various colours. Sometimes they come in natural green or natural browns. Sometimes they're dyed into various colours, and that immediately just gives me a sort of sense of, yes, I understand what's happening now. I might use some as a kind of little tree or bush next to the house. Yeah, that's quite nice, but then I want it kind of behind the fence of the house, I think. So very rapidly, let's get some glue onto that background. Just lever up the house a little bit, pop that in, and then pop the house back down, so that again it's creating the story of there are more plants behind the house. That's nice. I like that. I might create a little more shadow under the house in the long run with some dark paint. In fact, the French roast would do a good job of that. While I think about it, let's get a little paintbrush, dip in just into the lid of the paint there. Should give me some, just to give a little more grounding right under the house. Design tape wasn't quite doing the job for me. As that dries, it'll get a little more transparent, but that's pretty good. And then, of course, if you feel like that's done too much, while the paint's still wet, you've still got time. Yeah, look, if I brush it away a little bit, you get the words back on that design tape. Yep, good. That's working. She's going to come sort of here-ish. Yeah, so she does want mounting onto some little bits of cardboard, or you may remember we trimmed off various bits of cardboard from the cogs we used on the rusty cog tag the other week. And so those are going to come in handy. I'm just popping these back in so that again I can see where we're headed. This one is now too tall because of the moss. Yeah, you go there, you go there. Just that kind of little sense of wildness. This in a minute I'm going to have to glue down because otherwise it's going to start to annoy me. House has got crooked, just straighten that up. Still poppy seeds roaming around in here. I'm just going to have to live with that, aren't I? I think we're probably going to have this just maybe perched somewhere there. She's going to be there. Right, I'm going to grab some little bits of cardboard so that I can mount her into the mid-ground, not the foreground, but the mid-ground. Back in a sec. So here are my little cardboard bits and bobs. And depending how high I want her away from the background, I think it's probably going to be 2. And she can probably afford to have some behind her skirt and some behind her shoulders. And that's just going to bring her forward of our background. I'm sorry, I've done that barely on camera. So I've got a little pile of 2 there, little pile of 2 there. She'll rest on them like so, and then I can glue her and she'll be forward of the background. So that's just a question of 1, 2, glue those together. A little bit of glue in between those 2, like so, and a little bit of glue on the top. If I want to add another, of course, I will be able to. I've got 2 more here if I want a bit more depth. I don't want to put it between her legs because that'll show. So there she is, just mounted onto those bits of card to bring her forward onto the moss. Is it far enough? Yes, it is. I think it is. I think another one will bring her too far forward, but I don't know if you can see that she's now in the mid-ground, which is where I want her. And I think again I might need to just take the risk and do it. Bye bye Poppy. Just glue her in. Oh, which means, yeah, okay, you come out for a sec. We need to glue this moss. Let's move these poppies. And yeah, again, I'm just gonna put a little bit of glue around the base here and a little bit onto the back so that I've just got something to press this moss down into. It's always going to spring back. You don't need to worry about pressing down the moss and thinking you're going to flatten it. You'll be lucky. Good. So I'm going to put a little spot of glue onto the backs of each of those, and it's gluing to card. She's gluing to card at the back here, so we should get quite a good sense of adhesion. And there she is, looking out at us, which I really like. Yep, that's doing quite good things for me. That house is down in the background. She'll glue there. Let's have a look how our fence is doing in terms of drying and crackling. Well, as I thought, it is texture more than it's crackle, but there are bits of crackle on here, and they're going to show up all the better if we give them a similar bit of treatment as we've given to the doll. So I'm going to get some more of my French roast. I'm going to dip a little paintbrush in there again and just get a nice watery wash on the mat. I hope you can see that that's really more water than paint. And I'm going to rub that into the fence. Quite a rough. It's just getting, again, that texture to pop. Having bothered to create the texture, why not have it show up? Let's go like so. And again, take a look at where it's got you to. If you feel like it's now too brown or it's not quite doing the job, while the paint is still wet, which it will be for a while, given we made it so watery, high water content is going to take much longer to dry, then that'll give you, but I'm pretty happy with that as an effect. That's looking pretty good to me. I might add just a bit of inking to the top and the bottom just to increase that sense of dirtiness, particularly the bottom where it's up against the earth. That's going to be grand there. Or maybe it wants to go right on this interior tin frame where the lid was joined originally. No, I think it wants to be right in that foreground, or it wants to be, no, foreground. Foreground it is. It is the foreground. So it might now be time to get the poppy stems in, or we might be able to glue that first. Again, I think this is going to need maybe a little bit of support just here to bring it up to the surface of this, or we might be able to glue it just onto that edge. Let's do it. Let's put the glue here. We'll find out whether it's willing to or not. So if I glue right round on this rim, here's where the fine applicator is helpful, and get that fence into place. And what I want to make sure is when I stand this up, that fence is not below floor level, because if I want this to stand on a shelf or somewhere, I need to make sure those fence bottoms are not sticking out below where the base of the tin ends up being. Let me just do that again and check. So in order for this to stand up, you can see it's not quite willing. Again, what it's going to need is just a little block of wood stuck to the back so that will then stand up. That's because of the slope of the wall of this. Good, so that's in position. Until I just moved it again. Leave it alone, stop fiddling. That's when you get in trouble, is the tendency to fiddle. Good, that's where we need it. And I might obey my own suggestion and leave all of that so far as it is to dry for just a couple of minutes before I come back and start poking around with poppy stems. Back in a sec. When I planted my poppies last year, I planted them really far too close together, some of them, and I can never bear to thin things out once they start growing. So what I've also got are some really, really tiny poppy seed heads that never really developed fully, but did, you know, give us teeny tiny little flowers and then teeny tiny little poppy seed heads. So I'm wondering about having some of these giant ones over this side and just these 3 little ones in a corner next to her. And I think the way to achieve that is probably to bind those together so that they've got a little bit more stability, because they really are quite teeny. So there's just a little bit of twine, or maybe tape is the way to go. A little bit of tape, that'll hold them together. And I've got this little bit sitting here, so let's just wrap that around the stems. That's just going to make them easier to handle, keeping them in position. And they've naturally formed themselves into a lovely little cluster. Thank you. Thank you, nature. Nobody does it better. They are at the moment a little bit tall. Oh, dash it. We're going to end up trimming off all of our tape. No, if I go part way down the tape, I think I can still get just enough. So if that's tucked behind her, no, they do need to be a little bit shorter, so I'm going to have to put some tape a little further up, and that will change the position they're in, but it's all fine. It's all playtime. And as I'm playing, again, little stories are happening in my head about escaping to nature, about finding your way to mystical, magical lands. Maybe I've had too many poppy seeds. There we go. See, that's lovely just behind her there. Very good. Let's pop some glue in. In fact, let's pop some glue onto... it helps if you have the lid off. Let's pop some glue onto the one that we know is touching the base. And let's just give those a little touch so that they have a chance of gluing to something else if they feel like it. Yeah, I like this one coming up the side there. That's good. He could really do with just a little bit of glue right there, just to encourage him to stay put. Grand. And then our others are going to go in a sort of giant way just behind the fence, I think, so that we've got again this kind of sense of these are behind her. These magical giant poppies are going to grow in here like so. Let's just have a look at those. Yeah, so I want one glued to the back of the fence, kind of there. Yeah, good. So I need some on the front of that stick, I need some on the back, maybe you were touching. Let's see if we can kind of wedge him while the glue dries. All of this it's trial and error. It's working out where you need the glue to make contact in order for the thing to stay put. Let's have you as the next one. I do want you sort of mid-air. How are we going to achieve that? You come up with these desires and then you have to work out how to solve them. I think if we glued you into the base, we could probably have you coming. I can feel the sponginess of the moss just resisting a little bit. I think I'd probably glue you to your pal there. Yeah, okay. So again, it's a little bit on the front here, and then it's a little bit on this and on the rim of the fish tin. So that I'm aiming to get onto the fence. That I'm aiming to get next to him. There we go. Again, this is going to require not fiddling. I might be able to get a little peg in to hold those to the fence just while they dry, but it does, of course, yeah, move them up above. So it's a balancing act again. I need you two to stay together up there and down there. There we go. That's the positioning. That's those two. Then it's maybe you into the background a bit. Yeah, that would do me. Somewhere there. How can we achieve that? Not without a big pile of these, and then you'd see those, which would be a shame. Ooh, maybe what we could do is use a little glass bauble to support you, and then we wouldn't be so bothered. Or maybe I can pile up some bits further down, kind of under there, for your stem to rest on. That's the thing to do. Good, okay. Let's go 1, 2, 3 of these, I think. 1, 2, 3. Because he's much finer, the poppy seed stem is much finer than the doll, so he needs a taller pile in order to come forwards. And then I'm just going to glue him to that. I think it's going to be around there-ish. Well, let's glue that in to where we want it, which is just kind of below and nearby the house. In there. Trying not to knock the peg as I go. Here's where the tweezers come in handy. I know the light is not helping you now. I don't think there's much I can do about that, short of shining a spotlight in there. I've glued that little pile just down under the fence there. That peg's also not helping you. And I'm going to hope that by sliding him into the glue that's on top of it and leaving him to dry, I can have him again in the mid-ground. I think we'll maybe try very carefully to remove that now. So that, without the peg there, hopefully you can see a little better. If I rotate this, that's my little pile of wood. That glue that's on top there at the moment will dry clear, so that will help us. And in any case, it's almost tucked out. If I move it, I'm going to slide it downwards a little bit so that it's tucked more behind the fence and out of our eye line. It was that peg that was helping things dry, just gave me a false idea of how much room I had to play with there. That's good. That's good. Let me hold it up and show you where we're at. I'm liking that quite a lot now, because I've got this kind of sense of distance. I've got the house going back. It's got little bits of tree and moss. She's here in the foreground. She's fairly stable now. These are fairly stable. These are still a little tentative, so I'm not gonna mess too much. Just wondering about this little hydrangea flower, maybe tucked in by the fence or by her. Don't want to cover her up too much because I do love her. Maybe it comes just this side of the fence, but I also like the fence, so I don't want to mess that. I'll just keep looking, see if something strikes me as being a good thing. That's overbalancing everything too far that side. Pop it back here. I think maybe if we had two of them, if we had one up here and one down below, that's kind of pretending to be a poppy now, which I don't want it to do. I don't need to pretend it's a poppy. I'm going to leave that for a minute and have a look at it, because what I'm now also thinking is, I think possibly it's going to be some of this tape around the edge of the wall of the tin, and I think maybe there are going to be some words somewhere. So, oh, a moth. I was wondering about a moth, wasn't I? Well, we should just have a look. Given the idea crossed my head earlier. That's a bit much, isn't it? Even though I did want Alice in Wonderland and kind of giant things going on. Maybe it's that instead of the hydrangea. What about if that's there? Now that's a little bit weird. I mean, my day started wanting weird and fantastical and extraordinary. Let's perch that on a poppy stem. No, too much. Okay, as I said, I'm going to go away, going to let that fully dry and think about the words I want to use. Back shortly. Okay, nearly there. Let's put this mushroom away. It lives to play another day. And also I can then use it to model some of my own on as a reference. I found another little hydrangea petal, and I think having the two of them might be the answer to what's going on down here. I haven't quite worked it out yet. And in terms of words, I think I have worked it out. I think it's from one of my PaperArtsy Pressed Foliage stamps. This is EAB39 Pressed Foliage, and it's this little poetry fragment here, which is Gerald Manley Hopkins, Long Live the Weeds and the Wilderness. Oh, The Shadow of a Dream would also be good. The poetry fragments on these are just little magical words to take the breath. And I don't really know, I'm not sure which colour I want to stamp it in. It might be sepia, so that it matches in with some of the brown spots going on here. Quite like the idea of this beach cruiser one, which will tie it into the house and some of those turquoise ones. And so I think the best thing to do is to stamp one of each and take a look. I think probably white card is going to be the way to go, although I obviously will edge it with some ink. Really don't need a huge stamping plate like that. That's unnecessary, but it's the one that's there. So let's take a look at these. Maybe it's one sepia and one beach cruiser. Maybe it's two phrases in two different colours. Let's have a look. So that's that. The sepia works beautifully, doesn't it? To tone in with those other colours that are going on there. Let's have a look at beach cruiser. It comes up a little darker than it looks on the cover so far as I've stamped it. It's quite new to me. Oh, I like both of them. I'm going to have a look at them in situ. I don't think I want it as a block of text, so I think what I'm going to do is probably cut the two lines apart, which is why I could have one of each if I wanted. One beach cruiser, one sepia. Let's look at it at a block first, just to make sure. No, I definitely don't want it as a block. And I might just want Long Live the Weeds. Or I might just want single words, weeds and wilderness. Long live the weeds. Ah, it's all right. Let's look at it in the... Where's my sepia one gone? Thank you. We know we don't want the block. Long live the weeds. Let's have a look at that version. Interesting. Let's try putting one of each just so I can see what that does. Long live the weeds and the wilderness. I think we're going to bring the tweezers back into play. I think that's just going to be easier. It's covering up quite a lot of the ink splotch is my hesitation at the moment. And I do love those ink splotches. And what's the point in stamping in a colour that tones in with the ink splotches and then covering them all up? Long live the weeds and the wilderness. I kind of do like having the whole thought. Maybe what it is, is we have the whole quote going around the side so that you can find it, but we have individual words up there. So I'm going to look at the individual words in sepia, weeds and wilderness. I can always restamp. This is the joy. I'm not going to run out of these words. I can have them as many times as I like, as long as I don't run out of paper and ink. Weeds. Come on, turn over. I know it's you. Weeds. Wilderness. Weeds. No, it's stuck to the tweezer. Thanks. Wilderness. Or maybe it's over there. Just having a look. I think I am going to need to stamp it again because I need to look at those as single words, but I want to hang on to the whole words in the beach cruiser for the outside of the tin. But I want to see the individual words in beach cruiser as well. Sometimes you just don't know until you look. Wilderness, weeds. Really don't need to be using these giant scissors either, but they're the ones that are here. Right, you out, you in. I know there are some of you shouting at the screen now, very strong opinions about which ones I should use. That's great. When you make your own, you can make the decision that you want. I think it's the green ones. I think it's the green ones. There's just something really nice about how that echoes the house and doesn't draw the eye too much. The sepia is making me look too much at the words. I'd rather the words sort of filtered into my consciousness a little bit later. But what I am going to do is I'm going to edge them in a little bit of brown. Vintage photo, I think, probably is going to be the ink of choice for that, which is pretty close to the sepia archival. No, you don't want to edge the sepia ones, you want to edge these. So that is giving me a touch of the sepia whilst giving me the words in beach cruiser, which is the best of all possible worlds, right? I'm having my cake and eating it, which you can do in craft terms sometimes. There we go. That's the weeds in the wilderness. I don't want to cover up that bluish spot, annoyingly. So if they go over a little bit, is that okay? That actually balances the poppies quite well if they go over to that side, rather than fully central. Weeds, wilderness, weeds, wilderness. Somewhere there-ish. So you between the two grey spots, you below. Yeah, okay. Let's have a spot of glue. In there. In there. In there. That's 2 spots of glue because it's a longer word. The weeds and the wilderness. And look, they've ended up a little closer together and I love it. That's right. That's what it needs to be. Great. So around the edge, I think the same thing, a little bit of inking with the vintage photo, but it's the beach cruiser again that wins. There's still some ink on there, so I don't need to ink again. Long live the weeds and the wilderness. And so where this is going to be is around the edges of the tin. I think it's, where's my design tape gone? I think it's a little run of this right around the base, something like that. I like that. And it's going to be not a solid line, I think. So I'm going to run around the base here. Like so. Just to create a little bit of detail and interest around the wall. And a little bit that comes down from the top on this side. So we're getting quite nice randomness here with those torn edges. Nice text, enjoying that. And then we read from left to right. So I think the first half of the phrase needs to go on the left side of the tin. Long live the weeds, there it is. Okay, glue back please. On here. Long live the weeds, just tucked under the ridge there. Oh look, I haven't glued down my hydrangeas yet, have I? That's going to be the final decision. Long live the weeds. And then round this side, don't do that hydrangea. Around this side down at the bottom. So again, it's those balancing acts. It's the same thing, poetry, visual poetry, repetition and variations. So the words are at the top on one side, they're at the bottom on the other, as in the top of the tin this way up, but also the top that way up, and then the bottom this way up, and the wilderness. Long live the weeds and the wilderness. So that you only find that poetry later, that those words hover into perception. So let's, final touch, let's see if we want these hydrangeas or not. There goes that one, there goes that one. See, what I very often do, interestingly, when I can't decide whether something belongs or not, is I take a photo of it with and a photo of it without, and it's very often by looking at it on the photo that I get a clear answer, but I can't do that because I'm using my camera to film with. That's what you're looking at right now. I'm going to zoom in on that so that we can you can take a look with me. I'm going to clear some of these words out of the way because they're distracting the eye. I'm going to clear some of these inks out of the way because they're distracting the eye. And just with the flowers, without the flowers, it's with the flowers. Grand. Now it's just about getting those flowers to behave and be where I want them. I think it's you there. Let's see if we can get some glue somewhere that's going to encourage you to stay put. These are very delicate, so I don't want to fiddle with them too much. They've got a little, each of them's got a little stalk that is either going to be helpful or really unhelpful. The glue's already dripped down the side. That's not helpful of the glue. Right, you there. Yes, that petal is stuck. I felt it happen. And you, I'm going to put some glue on this stem, and I'm going to put some glue around those petals in the hope that I can somehow encourage them to stay put. I want you up a bit because I want you overlapping. I don't want all brown. I want a little bit of both in a cluster. You a little bit further that way because I don't want to cover her feet too much. So I say they're delicate and then I manhandle them. Yeah, getting there, getting there. I might try a little bit of glue here just to ask you, yes, to overlap, thank you. And then press down a little bit into the moss, because there is glue on the back of this brown one. There we go. So I'm going to maybe do a little bit of white spatter, not sure actually for once whether it really needs it. I'm going to take a little look and see if there's anything else I want to do, and then we'll dive in for a close-up. Thank you so much for your company as always. I'll try to leave details of as much as possible down in the description below. And yeah, so check there first if you've got any questions, but otherwise do leave me comments and questions, and I will do my best to get to all the answers. Leave a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this, and if you're not subscribed, I would love it if you'd join us on this creative journey. We're nearly at the year, we're nearly there, we're nearly at the full year, which is very exciting, and I'm delighted to have your company along the way. Thanks so much for watching, and happy crafting all.